I'm not going to talk about myself too long, but I guess you should know my biases and prejudices right up front. In my own kind of private practice and life, and when I get the chance to go to conferences and give talks, in terms of my advocacy, you could definitely put me in the camp of people who think that, at least in the Western industrial democracies, copyright law has tilted way too far to the rights of copyright owners and copyright controlling industries like the film industry, the recording industry, and that the chilling effects have really hampered the development of culture. Actually, they haven't that much. They've just criminalized it in the sense that I think most of the interesting things for me, and again, I'm not suggesting you should agree with me. I'm just trying to let you know where I'm coming from. It seems like most of the interesting things that are happening in the culture right now, particularly online, are at least somewhat illegal, and that troubles me. So in what small way I get to be an advocate, I do go that. I'm going to try to keep that under wraps a little bit. And by the way, if you want to see like an example of that kind of work, I recently did a presentation for DS106 on like mashups, and I did interviews with a number of really great mashup artists and talking about adbusters and a lot of the kind of roots of remix culture, people from Argentina and Spain and England, and so that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that gets me excited and passionate. When I look at the internet, I just see, and digital tools in general, I see a set of tools with just absolutely, like 20 years ago, I would not have believed the power that I and others have to find interesting work, to repurpose it, reshape it, remix it, and then reshare it out to the world in terms of ease of use and speed. Now, I'm not saying that artists shouldn't have rights or the ability to protect their works or hope to get paid for their work. I think that's a really urgent cultural problem. But the way it's been dealt with, in my opinion, has been completely heavy-handed, and there hasn't been a conversation there. Now, that's me speaking as Brian. You'll notice that that particular site I linked to, I actually moved it to not my UBC blog. I actually, about 4 months ago, moved a lot of my blog, and I still do maintain a blog on the UBC server. I do more of my stuff now on my own server and on my own domain, even though it's still under my own name. The reason I do that is precisely because I personally feel like what I'm doing falls within how I personally define fair dealing and fair use, personally. However, it only takes one person to disagree with that to send tersely worded letters, and what you'll find is that these people, and I don't know if any of you have had dealings with this, they tend not to just send you a letter. They send a letter to your boss, they'll send a letter to Stephen Toop, they'll send a letter to the provost, and even when I haven't been directly involved with these cases, there's a natural reaction, kind of like, what is going on here? And the fact that some of these things have happened on UBC servers can itself be an issue. So I guess lesson number one, and again, I'm more or less speaking my own opinion here, it's unfortunate that being in an academic setting, you would think if anything you would have more rights in an academic setting or an academic context. It's my experience that if anything within an academic environment or an institutional environment or even an organizational corporate environment, you have to be a little more careful than you would be in your own private life. It's a little bit sad that things that you would do in your day-to-day life and you take for granted as something you can do aren't something you could do in the course of research or education. But unfortunately, the way the law is written and the way the prevailing winds are blowing, that is the way we're going. Hopefully, if we all become a little more active and interested in these issues, we might have a role to shape in it. And I'll get into why that is in a second. And I guess why I've started to become a little more conservative on these cases, at least at work, is I've been getting looped into cases like this. So I've just reported the text of an email. So I wasn't this isn't directed at me. This came to a professor. I won't say what faculty she was in. The image in question was absolutely heartbreaking. It was just her personal faculty page, where you put your bio and your office hours and things like that. And there was a very simple generic image that you might have guessed was clip art, but it wasn't. she had gone to Google image search clearly, found an image that, and it was related to her discipline, I'll just say, and she just copied this image. And if you looked at it, you probably wouldn't, if you looked at her homepage, you would probably spend half a second looking at this image. It was just there purely as decoration. As a result of it, though, there are these copyright collecting entities, some of which are legally empowered, not all of which are, that have bots that scan the internet literally looking for these images. So this isn't even like somebody reporting you for a copyright violation. This is flagged by a machine. This email was almost certainly generated automatically without a human being ever writing it. And as you can see, writing you today because you used this image on this site without a license in place. I took the name out of the person, they took the image, here's the user. In order to make this usage legal, we will issue a retroactive license as soon as possible. And you can see the amount, nearly $2,100 to use this incredibly pointless image. I'm quite sure nobody would pay 5 cents if they had to be asked up front to do it. This is what's called a demand letter. They're almost always on behalf of these organizations. They're rarely coming from the artists themselves. So again, this is, there is a legitimate discussion here to be had about how we value and remunerate artists in our society, and I don't have easy answers for that. But this isn't about that. And I got looped into this early on, and then I kind of got looped out because I really didn't have anything to do with it. And I never was able to find out what happened in this case. And the natural instinct when these things happen, of course, is to keep it quiet. You don't hear about these cases. And it makes me wonder how many times this has happened at UBC, or is happening right now. How many of these letters are being sent to people because someone took a very simple generic image and just wanted to make their homepage look a little nicer. The typical thing that happens in these cases, I know that UBC Council got involved. The unfortunate thing is the way the law is written, she did actually use an image that was licensed by this entity. It wasn't Getty Images, by the way. I linked to something here on the issue of what's called demand letters. This is a part of a blog maintained by a Canadian intellectual property professor. And he's talking about Getty Images. So they actually have bought swaths and swaths of the images that if you just do a Google search for just any kind of generic image, there's a very good chance that image is actually owned by one of these conglomerates. They've bought just huge amounts of this stuff up. And it's readily available on the open web, so you think that it's there for the taking, but unfortunately it isn't.
Is it searching the image itself or searching the data on the image?
How do they find it, you mean?
Yeah, because sometimes if I see something, I download it, crop it, or...
Right, change the name. They've gotten so much better at identifying actual material, not just metadata. It used to be, yeah, if you changed the title of something, you'd probably be safe. Anyone who has an iPhone knows this. There's apps where I can take a picture of a book cover and it'll automatically send me to the... It can actually identify the characteristics of that artifact. It doesn't even have to be a full digital copy. It can be my shaky handheld photograph. Tools like Shazam can actually identify a piece of music just by playing it in the room. That's how YouTube videos, there's a colleague in my workplace who uploaded a 30-second video of his daughter dancing at a ballet recital. And I forget what it was. There was music playing in the room that they were dancing to. And before the night was up, before he had 3 views, so nobody reported him. This was done all automatically. There's this tool called Content ID on YouTube that identifies these things. Had actually said, no, you have copyrighted music, and actually stripped all the audio out of his YouTube video. That happened before the night was up. So yeah, these tools for identifying even minute amount of uses, croppings. I mean, there have been people too that have been nailed for taking 2-second samples and putting it through so much distortion that the original is completely unrecognizable. And that is not a legal defense, by the way. Boy, no, I'm already going down a direction I really didn't want to go, which is fear-mongering. I really hate the fact, actually, especially within an academic context, that these discussions inevitably become about getting so fearful that people just say, you know, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to get the blandest, most, you know, inoffensive material I get. I'm going to make sure I pay for it. I'm going to make my students pay top dollar for it just to cover myself. And that's going to be it. And I'm going to lock it down. I want to make sure nobody can see what I'm doing. And I think that would be a tragedy. I really do. And I really hope that that's not what I send you out of here for. That said, I guess I'm kind of just giving this bit of horror context. I'll get to in a sec. Just because I feel like I've done some of these events in the past, and a few of you know this. And I feel like I've been a little freer and easier, I think, around some of this stuff. And I feel like I got to change my messaging because I wonder about how many people are getting letters like this, including about Creative Commons stuff, by the way, which we can get to in a minute. Yeah.
So if you put it on your private, personal website,
yeah.
You would be fine?
No, but at least then they're not writing your boss, and they're not writing the provost, and they're not, you know, I've had this incident. I had an incident too. This would be a good story. If anybody wants to go for a beer later, I'll tell you the story. But where a professor at another university took exception to something I said about him. And in my opinion, it was complete legitimate criticism. But the fact that it was on a UBC blog, he felt gave him the right to write Stephen Toop, the provost, the vice provost, my director, and my immediate supervisor. The amount of time he must have spent to identify all this stuff. And he made it very clear that the fact it was on a UBC server, as far as he concerned, meant that they were, yeah, or validating it or standing behind it, even though the terms of use on UBC blogs make it clear that we do not. And again, I never actually heard from Stephen Toop. I did hear from the vice provost, Anna Kindler, and she looked at my post, and she looked at his complaint, and she said, you know what? Nothing you wrote is really that bad. This is all legitimate criticism. He's not in the right. That said, he is making one hell of a stink, and we would just be grateful if you would take the post down and, you know, make this go away, which I did. And it was issues like that where I'm going, you know, if you got a problem with me, or if I'm going to be, and like I said, because of my own personal views, I want to push what fair use is. There's a professor at Richard Smith. I thought he had this very articulate statement, you know, that rights, they're like a muscle. They're only as strong as how they're being exercised and used by people around it. So he feels he has an obligation to take a very aggressive approach to fair use and do it in public and do it without shame. And he says, only by doing that can I expand what is considered fair use and fair dealing within Canada. And I really admire that stance, and I'd like to exercise it well. That said, I don't necessarily want to feel like I'm going to get my manager in trouble because I'm taking that point of view. So that's kind of where I come from, if that makes sense. So yeah, so to just move on to Canadian copyright, I'm not going to say too much. I will just note that on this resource page, the UBC Library has put together a pretty good primer on the basics of Canadian copyright, which you can look at. I won't go into that into too much detail. Just to note, Canadian law, copyright law right now, is in a certain amount of flux and even limbo. Key provisions of the existing copyright law have been struck down in the courts. So, for example, there hasn't been any enforcement of illegal downloading because, as it stands, I hope I'm not stating this incorrectly, but my understanding is the police cannot compel internet service providers to give up information about who's doing stuff on their networks, like downloading. So effectively, there's this gray area about illegal downloading in Canada. It's not legal to download an episode of The Wire to your computer, but there's no real way that the police can enforce that provision in the law right now. So there have been numerous attempts to reform and update copyright law in Canada since Harper was elected for the first time. And 3 separate bills have died on the order table, either because Parliament was prorogued or an election got called. Because essentially when either of those things happen, they sweep the pending legislation off the table and they have to start again. There was a bill called C-32, which surprisingly enough, even people like Michael Geist, who are normally highly critical of copyright legislation and things like that, as it typically stands in the mainstream, said there was a lot to like about this bill. It actually did seem to represent some kind of balance between content creators and consumers. It'll be very interesting to see. They say they're going to reintroduce the bill. It'll be very interesting to see if some of the more progressive elements of this bill are still in place now that they're a majority government as opposed to a minority government. We'll see about that. So this thing called access copyright, and Aaron, do you want to just maybe provide any updates on what Joy might have said this morning?
Well, I don't know what you're looking for, really.
Okay,
well, I mean, we're in an interim agreement with Access Copyright, which is also complicates things a little bit. They're looking to charge the university way more money than they used to for educational use of copyrighted materials. So that creates another problem. We, first of all, don't have an up-to-date act, and then we also have this kind of uneasy situation right now with Access Copyright.
And just a bit of background for those who know, Access Copyright, although they act like they're a government agency, are not. They're a corporate entity. I think they're classified as a nonprofit that essentially exists at arm's length from various publishing industries, and what they say they do is we collect these levies and distribute it to content creators. Eugene, you wanted to add something?
The money involved is very interesting. Right now we pay around $3 per student, so in total $650,000 per university. They plan to change it to $40+ per student, which will come to more than $2 billion for universities. So it's a huge increase in money that the university cannot afford itself to pay. And UBC will most probably opt out of Access Copyright, which will mean for us, all faculty members will need to be more aware of the information they're going to use. And librarians will need to be involved a little bit more in educating ourselves in the university in the copyright issues, which is very problematic. We have interim agreement with Access Copyright till 2013. The rates will stay the same. But since then, it will be university decision, and one of the university execs will need to make a decision to opt out or stay in.
Yeah. So and this is an interesting issue because, it isn't just an issue either of a very dramatic increase in rights. If you talk to colleagues at other institutions that are staying with Access Copyright, a colleague who's a librarian at Emily Carr told me that she needs to come up with a list of every copyrighted resource that's been used in an online course, and closed or open, in the last 3 years. And those weren't records they were keeping. So to come up with these kind of things is quite interesting. Some of the critiques that are out there, it's one of those issues that's really hard to get really clear information, but something that is quite interesting too about what Access Copyright wants to do, I'm just pointing to the proposed revised license agreement. The educational institution shall give Access Copyright right to access throughout the educational institution's premises in order to organize and carry out audits, including full access to the secure network and all course collections. What they're saying here is that Access Copyright, as part of their agreement, if we stay in this agreement, wants the right to basically inspect anything electronic on campus, and that would include your email. So it's not just the money, which is considerable. It's the fact that really some of the demands they're making around enforcement that are really problematic. So yes, although the official decision hasn't been made, it's looking, if you just even look at some of the, where was it? I have a link somewhere here to the latest statements out of the UBC library. It seems clear that it's quite likely UBC will opt out. It would be one of the few schools to do so. Speaking for myself, as Brian Lamb, citizen, I'm pleased by this, although it is going to create a lot of work. I'm not convinced that going through and playing ball and rolling over would be any less work from what I'm seeing about what they're saying.
I think to me, what's a very sad thing is because on one hand, Access is being lobbied by writers, dramatists and anybody who has content that they want to get paid for, that they created. And librarians specifically, who will end up with this incredible workload of trying to give the stats that that Access wants, aren't against, you know. So we're ending up with people who are trying to educate at the same goal, but at opposite ends. I mean, this whole thing. So there's extreme stuff happening here because people are feeling they're not getting, they're paid for the work they do, and librarians who want to put it out there but are going to be backed into a corner, as are even instructors like myself. You put a link on it on a website, say go to see this link. There are some recommendations to say that will be illegal. I mean, what are you supposed to do online? You can't say you go to this link, right? And then they've also even some of the proposals say it's no fair dealing doesn't include education, it includes educational institutions. So it narrows the definition of education so that public libraries get left out because they're classified under libraries and not as an educational institution. And it gets very complex, and we end up being at war over, you know, what we don't want to be at war over. You know, we're both sympathetic, you know. It's a very, I think it's quite an interesting thing, and we should be shaking the rattle a little bit.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying so. I mean, and obviously I think it's something that shouldn't just be something that a few activists and people with their own strongly, I think it's exactly everyone needs to, you know, educate themselves a little bit on, and admittedly it is a complicated issue, but you know, right now, unfortunately, you kind of do see the copyright debate does tend to get dominated by extremists on both sides. You kind of have open source radicals on one end who have been the only ones really who've been motivated to fight this stuff. And then on the other end, you have, you know, the commercial industries, and there hasn't been enough middle ground. I think actually librarians have been phenomenally helpful in this, but they're an exception.
Except for the Canadian Library.
I was going to say the Canadian Library Association did nothing. I just
Right.
went to a lecture that Dr. Samuel Troso, a law professor from the University of Western Ontario, and he thought it was absolutely ridiculous that U of T and other universities have come up with their guidelines. He thinks that's just an absolutely bad way to go, where you say, don't do this, don't do this. And he was advocating taking a look at the CAUT guidelines, that those are probably best way to inform ourselves.
Interesting.
About
Okay, I should.
No,
Thank you for that, and I'll try to make a note to add some of those guidelines to this wiki, either during a break or after the session, because that's really good. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on this, other than to just kind of set the context that, like it or not, and probably most of us aren't going to like it. This issue is not going to go away, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about it. At the very least, it's going to mean things like course packs are going to have to be prepared about 2 months in advance. There's going to be a whole lot more sensitivity about what people are doing with their activity online. And I dare say, no one's ever come out and said this, there has been kind of this tacit belief that if you do something in WebCT and you have password protection on anything, that you have this kind of protected space where you can do stuff. That was never the case legally. It may have been the case in reality. I'm not so sure it was. But it was a belief that people had. That's definitely not going to be the case moving forward. So I think the idea, and we're going to get into the more constructive part of the workshop soon, I think that's all the more reason why using copyright-friendly or open resources is a really important proactive strategy that you can do. We actually had an email go around in our department saying, you know, any workshop materials you've done in the last 2 years, could you make a list of all the copyrighted stuff you've done?
I have a very basic question.
Yeah.
So how do you know it is copyrighted? I mean,
Good. Well, I think essentially, unless you see a notice that says it's copyright friendly, you assume it's copyrighted. So that note paper there is copyrighted, and depending on her work agreement, she may own it, or the university may own it. I'm presuming your faculty, so I think you own it.
It's
So that was
If I did it, the university would own my notes right here.
No, that's not correct. That was clarified this morning.
Oh, was it?
Faculty, staff, and students own the copyright of their own material. In the case of, you may have a specific contract that it's
Okay.
work for hire.
Okay.
Where something specific you produce becomes the institution's, but in fact, you write it, you know, you write anything, it's copyrighted. And
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that because I was told 2 or 3 years ago by someone from UBC Legal that I did not have the rights that a faculty member had. And this person even seemed to question whether I had the right to put a Creative Commons license on my own materials, which I've been going ahead and doing anyway, but
we refer to policy 88 of the university. Apparently it said includes staff.
Mary Bryson.
well,
So-
great. I mean, I totally defer to Joy on these issues, so thank you.
She was very clear
And that's
about
great, okay.
So can you say again, so what does it mean?
that. You
Sorry,
write
so-
something, it's yours, copyrighted. You
A
don't
work
have
is-
to-
Basically, anything you create, including notes jotted on a notepad, is copyrighted. And actually, we're going to get into what Creative Commons is.
But how-
That doesn't relinquish copyright. I'm just stating the terms that you can reuse my materials. Basically, everything is copyrighted, unless you specifically take steps to put it into the public domain. So you don't need a C on it. You don't need to register a trademark. You don't need to contact a lawyer. You
But
don't.
how can you prove it is yours and you haven't taken?
Well, that's a case where you may have to fight over it. I mean, one of the ways if you want to protect your work, I mean, it's one of the reasons I like open web publishing is, you know, there's stamps on these things, there's server logs. You know, if you can demonstrate that you published this material before anybody else did, at least online, that's a way of staking your claim to it. So that's one of the benefits I've always felt for publishing openly. Anyway, just to circle back to my initial point, when this directive came out that said, go through all of your materials and make sure you haven't, you know, and make a list of all the copyrighted stuff you've referenced and da-da-da-da-da. I said, well, linking's okay, right? And that came back to, yeah, as far as we know, you don't have to write stuff you've linked to. I haven't used anything that wasn't Creative Commons licensed or public domain in at least 3 or 4 years. So that task was very easy for me. As far as I know, I'm not affected by that directive. So my point is that there may well be a point to this stuff. This stuff may save you some headaches down the road. That's my point. Just to point to a couple other things, as if we haven't made this point already, the UBC library actually has all sorts of information on copyright, and they have actual experts on call. On more kind of personal expression stuff, Martha Rands, who's spoken here at UBC, she has this nonprofit here in Vancouver called the Artist Legal Outreach. And they're kind of copyright friendly, but at the same time, Martha is obsessed with getting artists paid. So she's a really interesting person to talk to. You never quite know where she's going to stand on various issues because on the one hand, she acknowledges that existing copyright law is out of control and that most of the industries are behaving in unethical ways. At the other level, she thinks that the lack of support being shown to Canadian artists is shameful. So she's an interesting person to talk to. She's also just a good person to call or write. They have a number of good workshops and clinics that they do, including on things, what do you do if you get a cease and desist letter and things like that. So I should note, this is an alternative perspective, and this is the thing with the law. I think sometimes at workshops like this, I haven't heard too much of that from anybody here, which is nice. I think sometimes people come to these sessions and just want to go, what can I do, what can't I do, and and especially in the case of the law the way it is now, and with case law still very much in flux, it's really hard to say that. And that kind of comes down to my final point for this section on this notion of fair dealing. I've actually had someone at a workshop a few weeks ago put their hand up and went, okay, but I'm in my class, and so that means that, you know, I can take this stuff and copy because it's educational fair use, right? And they'd been proceeding under that conclusion. Well, first of all, fair use is an American concept, not a Canadian one. We do have this thing called fair dealing, which does include private study. Now, private study is a very different thing than you copying out handouts and giving it to your students or distributing a copyrighted PDF to your students by email. It seems to allow students on their own going out and acquiring those materials and photocopying it for themselves. And to an extent, I think that's what that access copyright levy is supposed to pay for. It's kind of this presumption that students are out there copying stuff they shouldn't be copying at photocopier machines, and this is meant to compensate that kind of use. But fair dealing is a much weaker concept in Canadian law than fair use is in the US. That's an important thing to know. And even in the US, Lawrence Lessig, who started Creative Commons, which I'll get into in a minute, he had one of those lines that stuck with me. If you want to know what he says, fair use is your right to call a lawyer when you get sued. And what he meant by that is, ultimately, you may well be within a definition of what fair use or fair dealing may have meant in certain types of case law in the past. In other words, you might be doing something that other people have done and seem to be okay. But ultimately, if someone takes you to court, you're going to be in there, there's going to be a judge or maybe a judge and jury, and lawyers are going to fight it out, and ultimately the decision will be made. And they're going to say, what kind of intent you had and how much stuff did you take. And there's no magic formula that, X number of words is okay, or it's a bunch of kind of nebulous concepts. So, yeah, unfortunately I can't give you too much there. But things like transforming the resource makes a difference. A critical perspective makes a difference. Yes, if you are doing educational research, that's a point in your favor. But they're all subjective things. All right, hopefully that ends the depressing part of the workshop. I took a little more time on it than I wanted to. Does anyone else have more to say, or does anyone think I've said something completely wrong? I really appreciate the people who have jumped in on things. We definitely need that. No? Okay, let's move on. I'm hoping most of you know what Creative Commons is, but I will do a very quick overview. When I started at UBC, and my job was actually to try to convince people to share their resources, to convince faculty to share their resources online. And there were a lot of things we had to fight through. One was there was this misconception that if you posted your materials on a UBC server, you actually relinquished your copyright in a way that publishing in print wouldn't do. It was a complete myth. You still run into people who think that. The other thing that was kind of a problem back then was the state of copyright law. As I mentioned, when a faculty member creates something themselves, they own copyright. They own the rights to that. And it used to be that if somebody wanted to reuse their material legally, they needed written permission to do so. There was really no way around it. Unless that professor in question posted some notice on there. And essentially you had to, your two options was copyright and then getting permission for everything, which is incredibly arduous and difficult to do, or releasing your materials to the public domain, in which case you say, I relinquish all rights to this material. It belongs to the world. Which is fine, but a lot of faculty members go, actually I put a lot of time into this. I don't expect to get rich off of it. In fact, I'd like to see people reuse it, but I'd like to see credit given to me. Other people said, what my fear is that, yeah, I'll put this stuff out for free, and what's stopping a textbook manufacturer from taking my work, putting it into a textbook, and selling it back to my students for $100 a book? And I didn't really have an answer for them. It was kind of this nebulous thing. Well, thankfully, little did I know, at that time, this organization called Creative Commons was getting off the ground, started by Lawrence Lessig, who I quoted earlier. And essentially what Creative Commons is, it's not an abandonment of copyright. A Creative Commons licensed work is still copyrighted, and that's something that's really important to remember. I think a lot of people think that if they license something Creative Commons, they're giving up their copyright. You're not. What Creative Commons is, maybe I should, this is the Canadian page I linked to, just because it's more likely to have useful information, but I'm just going to jump over to the global page, which is a little bit American focused, but the materials are a little snazzier. Essentially what Creative Commons is, and you'll see this one listed, is some rights reserved. If you look at, let's say you want to license an item or some of your work Creative Commons, you want to share your work, you want the world to use it, it presumes you want attribution. It doesn't even ask you if you want that. So if you don't even care about being attributed, you're probably okay with it going in the public domain. So the questions that come here are, do you allow commercial uses of your work, yes or no? Which, by the way, not as simple a question as it seems. I think people think, well, yeah, this is how I keep the textbook manufacturer from stealing my stuff, which I think was how this clause was intended. But there's suggestions that this could affect a lot of uses that are a lot more benign than that. Anyway, that's kind of a nerdy detail. I won't go into too much. Do you allow modifications? Yes. Yes, as long as others share alike, which means, again, if somebody wants to take your work and remix it, what you're saying is they have to share it back also with an open license. Or no modifications allowed. And you have the option essentially here, and this gets to your question too, of how can you prove it's your work. You do have the option actually to put your title in and essentially have a third-party registry that you're asserting that you created this work. Now, it's not proof, but it would certainly count in your favor if you were going to try to claim ownership. So, you know, I filled this thing out for my work when I posted it on the net to share 3 years ago, and there would be an independent record of that. So that's it, and as you can see, it's a very simple thing. And then when you do it, and you can see it's in all sorts of languages and different domains and things like that. And there is actually, and why I've linked to the Canadian site originally, you can actually get Canadian-specific legal wording in this that accounts for differences in Canadian copyright law. And actually, so Martha Rands, who I referred to as part of the Artist Legal Outreach, she is also actually the Vancouver project lead for Creative Commons. So if you have questions more specifically about Creative Commons, she's someone you can be in touch with as well. So most of the work I'm going to show you now, and what I call free stuff, is licensed Creative Commons. A very small subset of it is licensed public domain, but Creative Commons really has proven, whatever you think about it, and you know, when I'm among other open education nerds, we usually complain about Creative Commons the whole time because there are some things about how they're doing things that are a little bit frustrating. But in practical, realistic terms, what they've allowed in terms of sheer amounts of stuff to be shareable and opened up to the world, I hope you'll agree with me, because we're actually going to get into something a bit hands-on. I'm going to encourage you to look for some stuff yourself. I think it's quite remarkable. So again, too, I have links to their CC Learn portal. So there is actually quite an active educational outreach part of what Creative Commons is about. And their FAQ on copyright and kind of less onerous licensing might answer a lot of your questions as well. Before I move on, any other questions about Creative Commons or comments? No? Okay. Well, let's jump to the next section. So within the domain of kind of openly licensed materials, there is actually a fairly tightly defined notion of professional practice, mostly in higher education, but also K-12, called open educational resources. And this is actually there's so many people working on this stuff worldwide that the notion of open education, which is kind of how I got involved with this, kind of been swamped. And you actually hear people talk about OER, OER, OER all the time. That's almost become the point of the so-called open educational practice. What is an open educational resource? If you go to Wikipedia, and in this case I think actually Wikipedia is a pretty good source, they define that an open educational resource has 3 characteristics. One, it's available on the open web. So you don't need to log into a special site or have a membership or pay a fee to access materials. Number 2, it has an open license on it. So again, it could be public domain or at the very least a Creative Commons license attached to it. Or at the very least, it specifies terms of reuse. So not everyone uses Creative Commons. You'll see a site like the BBC, for example, for certain resources will specify terms of reuse, which are actually they're more limited than most Creative Commons licenses, but they do say under certain circumstances you can reuse this stuff. The third criteria, which is not always met, and which I'm going to talk about a little later, is it's in a format that kind of permits reuse and makes it easy for you to kind of change things, customize it for your own use, copy it to your own server, etc. I'll get into what examples of stuff that isn't so reusable and stuff that's more reusable in a minute. But for the first, let's jump into an exercise. And just before I do it, anyone who's reading along can feel free to jump ahead. But I'm going to just show a few of the ways you can find free stuff. So based on some of the feedback I heard, I think I'm finally getting to the point that some of you came here for. So some of these resources are not all as good as each other. And I must admit, I've kind of structured this in a way that some of you may not have, like I deliberately not have a great experience. So I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about each one. OER Commons is almost like a directory of open educational resources. So as you can see, you can browse based on discipline. You can browse based on types of materials, so they can be lab assignments, they can be audio lectures, they can be video lectures, they can be syllabi, they can be simulations, interactive applets, things like that. You can also browse by grade level. Another thing I like about this particular resource, let's see if they changed this, is you used to be able to browse by content provider. Here we go. You have to go back to the home page to do that. This will give you an example, too, of just the kinds of people that are making open educational resources available. So you're seeing groups like NASA, various European initiatives. So this isn't a fringe activity anymore, is my point. A lot of this stuff is best in breed, real fine materials. So this is another thing you might find useful in the sense of just identifying. If you recognize some of these educational providers, you might want to go straight in there to do your browsing. So their basic text search, to be honest with you, I haven't used it extensively. You're welcome to try it out. I'm going to give you a few minutes to play around. So OER Commons. So again, this is kind of, and you'll notice this, I'm going to get into the idea of respectable OER versus kind of insurgent OER. This is definitely the respectable stuff. This is kind of big institutions, funded stuff, accredited, kind of stuff. Our friends at BC Campus, they built a very low budget search with a little bit more liberal criteria. So they search more sites, but you may find that stuff's not quite so official. So a very simple OER search. And you can also browse based on disciplines. Now, I just want to back up a little bit because this is a tool that you may not know about. Did you know that you can create a Google custom search engine to search whatever sites you want?
Yeah, I do that all the time.
Okay.
Google Alert.
And then you can put that little search box in any window you want. I'll just even go to one I show. So for example, this Latin American Studies course, where's my list of sites? Maybe I didn't have any sites.
Okay. Limited to specific sites?
Yeah, so you can actually create, let's say, and the nice thing too is you can actually point to a page. So if you have a list already for your class of 300 suggested websites where students can look up materials useful for the course, you can actually just point them to that page and it'll all be that. You can point it to those of you who's the Delicious Bookmarks manager. That's actually how the BC Campus site is. You can actually just point it at your Delicious account and it'll only search the domains of the sites you specify. And then, as you can see, the nice part is at the end, you actually get this little search box that you can actually put inside your own page environment. So you don't even have to send the students to Google. So you could stick that inside your course page, your WebCT page, whatever. Anyway, this is a bit of a digression, but I do think the Google Custom Search Engine is a very nice tool, and it seems like a lot of times people aren't aware of it. It's quite powerful and quite useful. So I will take that one off. So just pointing that out. Now, along the lines of what Google can do, and I have to say, when I'm looking for OER or free stuff, the service I use the most is Google. Not the basic Google search, because as you know, as I've already mentioned, chances are if you search for something, Google will return all sorts of stuff you can't use legally. And by use, I mean copy it, incorporate it into your work with attribution. But one thing you do have the option of doing when you're searching at UBC, can somebody just give me a search phrase off the top of my head? Dinosaur, thank you. I feel like a dinosaur today. So if I want to search dinosaur, I have to hit this little link. They don't make it super easy. And then I can say, only return materials to me that are free to use or share. Advanced search index of Google. So if you go to Google, there's a little advanced search window.
Yeah, I see that.
And then you have to hit this little thing to toggle that. And then you do your search. And as you can see, it works for not just text, but it'll return your images as well. So these should all be Creative Commons licensed images. Now, do be a little bit careful here. Here's the one caveat. For example, on my blog here, this is my pirate blog, my blog on my own site. I license my blog Creative Commons. So my blog is being indexed by Google search in that case. Now, I took this YouTube video of the death metal singing rooster. I embedded that. I'm pretty sure that's not licensed Creative Commons itself. Most of these images are. But for example, that image was Creative Commons. This image was licensed Creative Commons, but it's a scan of an R-Crumb image that almost certainly isn't Creative Commons. So I haven't done copyright laundry here. I'm in a, let's charitably call it a gray area by using this image. So just because, and so it's quite possible this image could come up on Google image search. So my point is, just because it comes up on that site I just showed you, doesn't mean that every single one of these images is okay. You got to do that one extra step in clicking through and getting a sense of who put this together and where it's coming from. That's my point.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be safer just to go to, say, Flickr and limit yourself just to Creative Commons?
I was going to get to that. Yeah. I just like for image search, it's probably not the best site. I just wanted people to point out that even within Google, they can really cut down on your exposure. The other thing, this is, and I'll editorialize for about 30 seconds. One of the worst things that's happened to the internet in the last 3 or 4 years has been the emergence of these content farms. Are you familiar with these? Like eHow and these sites. They pay people $5 an article and they spam, and then and chances are if you search on something, these things just clog up your returns. And it's crap content that's just, it's there to be churned out. And literally these people are paid $5 to $10 an article or video. And then the so-called editors of these sites get paid something like 25 cents for every article they read and click through on. So anyway, I like the Google Advanced Search. This is one actually you can more or less ignore it because it was maintained by Creative Commons, but they've discontinued it. It still sort of works, but frankly it's not worth your time, so I'm just going to move on. If you're looking for stuff on the course level, and again, kind of on the, oh, this one's not working well. Let's just jump to this then. The kind of the big kind of moment when open education or open courseware, open educational resources arrived was about 10 years ago when MIT made the commitment to release all of the content from all of their undergraduate courses for free online with a Creative Commons license. And they did it. They spent a lot of money to do it, much of it which was fundraised from foundations. And some people will argue about whether every single course that they posted online this way is of particularly high quality or not. There is a ton of stuff here. And it kind of also brings to light, I think people think if they release their materials openly, that you're taking this great risk and that you risk destroying your credibility or you risk destroying your business model. There is no evidence that MIT has seen a drop in enrollments since they offered all their course materials for free online. Turns out people still think an MIT education has value. People still seem to, oddly enough, and if you think about your own university experience, this was the case as well, that the value of coming to a university is about gathering smart people together, having interactions, being able to ask questions of the professor, being able to get assessment on the work you do, and to be part of a community of scholars. The content is just the infrastructure. It's a lot like having nice buildings. What were you going to say?
So that means that I can go into this website and download the course material and then teach myself the slide modification?
You can, yeah. It's a non-commercial license, so you can't. Things like, this is one of those gray areas. No one seems to have a problem with tuition at an accredited institution. Some people would say that, for example, though, if you were to take that material, put it together in a book, and sell that book, that you would be violating the terms of their license. But would you be allowed to put it together in a set of PDFs and tell students to go to Kinko's and print their own book? That seems to be fine. This is one of those little arguments everyone has. But yes, you can.
You can use the illustration and everything.
Absolutely, yeah. You do have to provide attribution. So attribution is where you say where you got it. So if you take, like a reference, exactly. So, and like I said, some of it is weak, but a lot of it is actually surprisingly rich. So this is an index of just courses that are fully audio or video resources.
Do they update the...
Yeah. Yeah, they spend an ungodly amount of money, actually, to do this.
$10,000
It can be, yeah. There's a program at Yale where they're spending $50,000 for every course they've put up. It's nowhere near as extensive as this. Again, this is kind of the big OER, Ivy League, heavily funded kind of model, which, again, is just kind of, to me, the unfortunate part of this is if you read about open education or open educational resources in the New York Times, this is all they talk about.
Also Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah, exactly.
Those two, I guess, are the gold standards. Carnegie Mellon Open Educational Initiative.
Yeah, well, I'm drawing a blank on what they call their particular initiative, the Open Learning Initiative, I think, OLI, yeah.
This is like, oh, sorry.
Oh, please.
Like the iTunes U.
Well, there is iTunes U, yeah, and that's another one which I didn't link to. UBC is actually an iTunes U college. You can find lots of great lectures on iTunes U, don't get me wrong. Why did I not link to it? Well, we're getting back to my prejudices and biases section earlier on. I have my problems with iTunes. iTunes is an application. It was originally developed by Apple. And my problem with iTunes U is if you put something in iTunes U and you only put it there, there is no way to get through it through my web browser. The only way I can get to iTunes U is to open iTunes and go to iTunes U. And this is a proprietary program that I have to access through them. And this is the same interface they use that I use to buy music through them. It's essentially a shopping mall interface as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, in my opinion it is. Now, don't get me wrong, there are people here at UBC who I admire a great deal that are using this tool very well. And you can get iTunes for Windows-based machines, but I do have a problem. You can't get iTunes for Linux. So if you actually have a student who cares about open source enough to go to that little bit of extra work to learn about how their computer works and use open source software, you are penalizing them. And I just object that I can't link to this. You know, if this global geopolitics lecture from Stanford, I bet you it's really good. But I can't link to it from my blog.
So you can.
I can, but I force you to open iTunes. And if you don't have iTunes or you're not an iTunes, so I'm forcing you to use Apple's proprietary service. Now, there are lots of people I know in the open education field who will say that the opinion I just expressed is extremist, unrealistic, unuser-friendly. Apple's awesome. They do, you know, I have one of these stupid phones from them. They're good. They make good stuff. But personally, we do have technologies that can work for anybody that are built on open source and that I think can deliver a very nice user experience. So why don't we use those?
So if we want to podcast our
There's a lot of
lectures,
Yeah.
what's your recommendation?
My recommendation is get a WordPress blog and upload.
And then just monetize.
And then have a podcast feed right off the WordPress blog. And there are special plugins that can develop players, and like if you look at my this same site that I was just showing, you know, I can link to MP3s right in here, and it plays great and plays for everybody, whether they're on Linux or Apple or whatever. So I mean, I'm going to get into a couple more examples. But anyway, that said, if you're looking at that and you're going, I use iTunes, my students use iTunes, I think it's awesome, I like being able to download directly to my iPhone. Brian's just a cranky open source nutcase. Do it. I mean, like, those are your decisions, you know, but that's my opinion.
Or if you really want to know what the latest on open heart surgery is at Harvard, you know,
Yeah.
you can get this week's lecture.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, if you do know your way around there, you can kind of, like I've figured out how to get some iTunes content into other things, but I think I'm violating their terms of use to do it. So I'll do it for my own personal use, but I wouldn't necessarily do it and tell you how to do it, because I think we'd all be criminals if I did. Oh, by the way, everyone should come to my BitTorrenting for Beginners workshop. Anyway, so we have 45 minutes. Do you guys, I know some of you have been poking around. Do you want to take a few minutes to poke around some of those sources? See if you can find something good. And if you have a moment, on the wiki page, I have this link that says this form. This is completely optional. This is more for you to provide useful information for me. But if you use one of these searches, and I took out the UBC custom search because we discontinued that too. Sorry, I should have taken that search out. That should be the BC Campus custom search. Just say which service you used. And if you find something, even if you don't like it, paste in the URL. Tell me a little bit about what it is. This is completely anonymous. And if you have any questions or problems, fire this at me. The reason why I'm collecting this information is completely anonymous. I am genuinely curious what people in different disciplines other than me, when they try these tools, whether they're finding it useful or not. So that's the beginning and the end. I do nothing with this data. I'll never present it anywhere. It's strictly feedback. We might look at it at the end of the workshop if we have time, which I don't think we will. Do people want to take a few minutes to poke around? Sure. Okay. So we'll take like 5 minutes, and then we'll reconvene. So moving on, I know you had very little time to explore. How many of you saw something promising in what you were pointed at? Maybe? Maybe? Yeah. Okay, a few of you. Wasn't a total waste of time. That's good. It's always a bit weird to throw sites at people and ask them to go through them. But I think, in particular, I think the OER Commons site and the search tools through free learning and the advanced search, in all honesty, I think over time, as you get more used to those environments and collections, I think you will find those worth your time. They have been for me. Eugene and other people made noises about Flickr and other sites. So I was kind of showing you the official OER. So OER that's supported by universities or foundations, has the stamp of approval from some respected august body. But there's another world of stuff being created out there that is a little more off the cuff. And I think we're probably making one right now, because assuming this video gets posted somewhere, I'm pretty sure our policy is to do so using a Creative Commons license. So theoretically, we're all creating an open educational resource right now. And you're not likely to find one like this on one of those collections. So we talk about, so big OERs, there's a guy named Martin Weller in England who came up with this distinction. Big OER is stuff like an MIT open course, or when NASA makes an applet that shows how asteroids navigate in our solar system or something like that. That's kind of like, it's official, they spent money, they probably hired a professional instructional designer to sit down, they thought it through, it was vetted by lawyers at some point, and it kind of has that stamp of approval. The vast majority of the stuff that's floating around on the internet doesn't really fall into that category. It's the stuff that people are putting on their blogs. These are individual professors or just people working out, people who work for nonprofits, just passionate amateurs, whatever. The huge teeming world of the internet. And to cut yourself off from that would be a real shame. That said, when you wade through the world of so-called little OER, you're probably going to have to spend a little more time assessing the materials and looking through it. But I want to just show you a few examples of some really great resources. We'll show the one that Eugene was mentioning, Flickr's advanced search. So Flickr, for those of you who don't know, was it actually was a startup here in Vancouver 8 or 9 years ago, and has kind of become one of the certainly 2 or 3 most important photo sharing and also very short video sharing sites in the world. Very nicely designed site. It's actually owned by Yahoo now. Very nice social things, good picture quality, stuff like that. Well, one of the things, and as you can see, if you look at my presentation here, all the images that I have here, I got through Flickr's image search. So the way that works is, again, the regular search, Flickr assumes, unless the user specifies otherwise, that, that they want to copyright their materials. But they do make it very easy for people who share their photos to apply a Creative Commons license to it. And for whatever reasons, the culture of Flickr has become very Creative Commons friendly. I haven't done this in a while, actually, and I don't even link to it. The actual stats of images that are available on Creative Commons. So with the straight attribution license, more than 26 million. Attribution, no derivatives, another 9 million. With the no commercial clause, 54 million. Attribution non-commercial, 25 million. So the total here, just from my very bad math, would be about 200 million photos that are copyright free. The thing about Flickr too is that it's kind of one of the places where there are a lot of, well, for want of a better term, photo nuts out there. People who really are passionate about photography, a lot of them gravitate to this site, post to groups and things like that. So the regular search searches everything on Flickr. However, that link I showed you earlier, let me just go back to it, is the advanced search. Maybe I'll do that same dinosaur search again. One of the things too is you can have it normally will just look for photos and videos, but you can also say look for illustrations or animations. That might be a good one to do. You can have dates. But yeah, you just need to switch this little toggle on, only search creative license content, and hit that search button. And the results come in. Now what's interesting is it starts with the most relevant, what they think are relevant. I'm not exactly sure how they decide that. You can also just get the most recent uploads that have that. Or this one, which is kind of weird, the interesting one, which will tend to give you a lot of these really arty and very striking images. I think they determine the interestingness based on how many people download the image or choose it as a favorite or comment on it. So these are the images that tend to get people excited. So the nice thing about Flickr too, and we're going to get into this in a minute, is the reuse stuff. They make it easy for you to reuse stuff. So you can actually just copy and paste that code into your web environment, and you can do that in any place you can do HTML, so that includes your WebCT course. And it'll just appear there, and you never actually had to download the photo at all. You're just linking to it. There's an there's a school of thought that even if the photo isn't Creative Commons licensed, that this may well be legal. There's a lot of people who don't Creative Commons license their photos, but they enable this feature. Because you're not actually copying the file. You're just essentially representing the file, and they maintain control over it. We'll talk about embed code a bit later. But it does provide all your attribution information. Another thing that's nice, too, is I'm going to get into this in a minute, but Alan Levine developed this little Creative Commons attribution helper, which will also grab the code for you and make sure that the attribution is up to snuff by Creative Commons functions. So anyway, yeah, Flickr, pretty good source for images, especially if it's kind of cosmetic stuff. Highly recommend it. For music, there are a lot of sites out there that will give you what they call pod-safe music. So that's kind of the market, you know, people who have podcasts or they want to make their own music. The problem with most of these sites that are out there is they're user-generated, which means there's nothing stopping me from uploading the music I make to these sites, which means there's a very good chance that you may hear my music, which sucks. Most of these user-generated sites, to get quality is a real problem. And you'll never have heard of anybody. The thing I love about this site for music, the Free Music Archive, as they say, it says it's not just free music, it's good music, which sounds a little bit snotty, and I guess it is. But if you look at the list of their curators, well, WFMU, they've been heroes of mine for years. They're this legendary freeform radio station out of New Jersey who do brilliant music. You'll notice, too, from Canadian music, CBC Radio 3. So you can actually get, you know, bands like Martha and the Muffins, Echo Beach, Creative Commons licensed. Sloan, the Sheepdogs. These are all artists I've actually heard of. Carol and Mark. This is mostly Canadian indie music. That said, it's reached that one level of curation, and CBC has gone to the trouble to get these Creative Commons licenses approached. A number of really good labels add their music too. They have this really nice browsing interface that I really like too, so you can browse by genre if you're looking for blues music. And in some of those genres, you can get incredibly fine-grained. So within electronic, there's about, and I can say just even types of trip-hop. I think they have multiple types of trip-hop. Oh, maybe not. So the nice thing here, too, is you can see it does go by most recent, but you can, again, filter for most interesting. And it'll actually go by the stuff that tends to be downloaded the most. You can just play the page. You've noticed I haven't even signed in yet. You can test the files right away. And if you want to download it, it's right there. And they're 320 kilobyte files, very high quality. If you want to find out about attribution information, every artist has the right to choose how they choose to be, what the terms of use are. So you go to the artist page if you actually want to use it, and they will specify license info, what their particular terms are. And some of these artists give you a tip jar on their site if they choose to. So if you want to take their stuff and you think they're great and you want $3 or $4 to go directly to them without going through a label, you can do that. Anyway, so for music, I've never seen anything remotely as good as this. And I actually, when I have an hour or two to kill, I go through genres of music and I'm blown away by how much of this music I like. And I'm a total music snob. I hate most of what I hear, but there's a lot of great stuff here. So, and there's a lot of public domain music too. So if you like old jazz, classical music, stuff like that, actually quite strong. I'll just bring up classical really quick. So you can see quite a selection of things there: contemporary classical, old classical. A lot of stuff taken off wax cylinders and things like that too. That's a big part of their mandate, is to save a lot of the dying formats. So yeah, highly recommend them as a source for music. And then there's all these things just kind of floating around there, and you know, some of them are kind of OER and some of them aren't. This one is really controversial. some people think this guy is the future of education. Some people think he's the Antichrist, and I'm only slightly exaggerating. This guy, the Khan Economy, I think he was a teacher, and he just started generating dozens of these, hundreds of these YouTube videos. And they're almost all 6 or 7 minutes long. And the guy is a gifted teacher. He has that knack for taking a complex idea and finding that metaphor, finding that little thing. And if you look at just the sheer number of, so that's just on finance. There's a ton of stuff here on algebra. I believe he is a science teacher, so that tends to be where he's strongest. I've definitely had professors who've kind of wrinkled their noses at some of this stuff. In their view, he oversimplifies a bit. So I certainly wouldn't say go on if you find something in your subject, take his stuff and throw it in your course and don't even bother. Check it out, by all means. That said, check it out. He's a bit controversial, though, because he's getting money now from the Gates Foundation and Google, and a lot of people see this guy and people like him as kind of the thin wedge of destroying public education. Anyway, that gets into some political arguments again. If anyone wants to go for a beer later, I can fill you in on. But the open education space, which used to be this nice, happy family about sharing and making education cheaper for everybody, is actually just full of just hate and hostility now. It's a lot more interesting, but it's a little more hostile as well. Anyway, this is an example. And of course, for everyone like this, I mean, YouTube's problematic because YouTube claims a partial license over everything you do. So if you were going to share videos yourself, there's other services I would recommend using instead if you care about your rights. Vimeo would be one, Blip TV as well. You won't get as many viewers, though. And the thing about YouTube is just because of the sheer number of people in that community and hitting the like buttons and the favorite buttons and things like that, what you're interested in doing is getting a lot of eyeballs on what you're doing, YouTube really can't be beat. And we do have a YouTube channel at UBC, so you can actually avoid the commercials which they'll insert into the videos now. That said, there's tons of people like this. This guy is kind of the superstar of the kind of do-it-yourself open educator, and he's kind of a freak of nature. But there are hundreds of people like him in other disciplines all around the world, sharing their lessons, doing quick videos. And it's happening on blogs, it's happening on wiki pages, it's happening on communities like wikieducator.org. And some of it's really pretty cool. And where I get excited too, and if this was a different format, I'd show more of these examples, is getting your students making videos. And you say that instead of, well, my favorite project of all time, which I shouldn't talk about because I could do a whole 2 hours on it. A professor here at UBC decided instead of telling his students to write term papers, says create Wikipedia articles. And so this was an area of Latin American politics. So these students, when they're doing this article on Mario Vargas Llosa, and Mario Vargas Llosa is a very controversial figure in Latin America. He started his career as a novelist on the far left and then went pretty far to the right in terms of his politics over the course of his career. So politically in South America, he's an incredibly contentious figure. In the context of Peruvian nationalism, he's a very contentious figure. In terms of novels of the dictatorship, he's a very controversial figure. So students were working on this article in public, and they're like having to negotiate between all these vested interests in South America of people who are very interested in what the Wikipedia article on Mario Vargas Llosa has to say. But if you look at this article that they came up with, which was very poor quality when they started, I'll just scan down to the notes. Does that look like an A paper to you? The bibliography, and some of these students, by the way, said this was the first time they ever set foot in a library was to do this article, is pretty much a comprehensive bibliography of the scholarly work in English and Spanish. And, okay, so the students did this 2 or 3 years ago. Last year, who wins the Nobel Prize for Literature? Mario Vargas Llosa. And in a day. This thing was averaging 1,500 readers a day before that, went up to 150,000 readers a day, and has settled in at about 20,000 readers a day since. So literally millions of people have read this article, which before was not very good. Now, they actually got it to what's called featured article status, which is actually really hard to do. Only 3,200 articles have achieved it in Wikipedia. There's actually a very strict peer review function in Wikipedia. And by the way, Wikipedia is a completely open resource. That's just one of the lovely things.
Is it true that any image on Wikipedia has to be Creative Commons?
Yes.
Or can you get duped by scooping something from Wikipedia?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, Wikipedia is total anarchy on the technology level in the sense that I can hit an edit button at any time and do stuff. But it's actually quite conservative in terms of its regulations and process. So to get to a featured article is very strict. They are quite strict on images. There's no guarantee that somebody didn't slip something through. But yeah, no, Wikipedia is very, and actually for totally free content, the Wikimedia Commons is actually totally, totally public domain. And has huge amounts of images of all sorts of stuff. So anyway, that's a good one to have. I do point to that in one of my links. Anyway, just to jump off, that was a case though where the student work, instead of the students doing a simulation of what it's like to be a researcher and a writer, you actually said to these students, you know what, you're not going to pretend you're doing research and then you're going to bring it to me and I'm going to tell you how good you pretended to be a researcher and then hand you back this grade. So we're going to do this together. And you are going to do research and you are going to be accountable for it. And I did the evaluations where the students got to do feedback, and they all complained. It was just like, we've never had to work so hard in our times. We're not putting enough time into our other classes. We need bigger groups. This is way too ambitious. And I go, well, why are you doing it? I mean, you have other classes. You choose what to put your time into. And they were like, well, this is the first time we ever did anything worth doing. Like they were just like, it never even occurred to why I'd be asking that question. It's like, this is real. This is authentic. Had a huge motivating factor on them. In subsequent iterations, he did take that feedback and he's lowered the expectations. He doesn't expect them to get to that featured article status, which is really hard to do. So this is, he's continued to do this exercise. The results are not quite as phenomenally amazing, but then again, the students are considerably less upset as well. Yeah.
Do you have any information or any sense of what UBC academics think about Wikipedia?
We've never done a formal study of it. I can tell you just from, having been talking about Wikipedia with faculty for years, people are obviously coming to accept it. I mean, whether you like it or not is, and by the way, no one should cite Wikipedia in an academic, I can't believe we're still debating this in 2011. You shouldn't be citing Britannica either. Wikipedia is something like when somebody tells me something that I know nothing about and I want to begin to orient myself, it's a fantastic starting point, at which point I begin my research. It's an orientation, it's a reference. And I think from that point, I think, has anyone here not looked at least one Wikipedia article in the last week? Oh, maybe not in the last week, last month?
Yeah, last month.
Okay, so we're talking about degrees of online addiction here. Okay, fair enough. The fact is people are using it, is my point. Whether you say you like it or not. And I mean, the fact that you go into Wikipedia with this knowledge that what you're reading could be wrong, I think is a very healthy attitude. I mean, you should have that attitude when you read the New York Times, when you read, whatever. I mean, and that idea that when you read something and it seems notable, you should check it out, get the reference. Those are the types of behaviors that Wikipedia rewards, and I would argue that's just good scholarship. So, but yeah, there hasn't been a survey or anything that I'm aware of. There have been broader-based studies that are definitely showing that academics are using it more and participating in it more.
To see how it changes as you go from first-year anthropology or psych to a master's level or whatever, what happens.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that would be another example of little OER. So yeah, just making that point. There's just tons of stuff out there. Actually, around images, like that, there's this one site. It's actually built on top of Flickr, and it also just searches for Creative Commons stuff. And it's just Flickr, but I don't know. They've managed to make the interface a little better for these searches. And then when you want to reuse the image, they make it a little easier for you to take the image and reuse it. So comp fight is what it's called. That's another way of looking for images. You're basically doing that same Creative Commons search. It's just a different interface. So we have 15 minutes to talk about reuse. So you've got some free stuff. You're pretty sure it's legal for you to use it. Now what? The one thing to keep in mind, probably the only thing that's going to get you in trouble, and I actually negotiated communications on someone that at a UBC site, we actually used someone's Creative Commons licensed materials. And this person actually sent one of those letters, just like the one I showed you, only wanting $750. And it took about 8 emails to get him to say in English what the problem was. And he claimed that we did not attribute properly and thereby violated the license. So I used to love to say, you know, it's Creative Commons. Creative Commons button is a way of saying, I'm not a jerk. I like to share. And it's more of a cultural agreement, which is true. I wish I could tell you what I would have said a year ago, which I guess would have been wrong, so it's probably good that I don't say it anymore. I guess my point is you still got to be a little bit careful. And attribution is a very important thing. Like I said, for things like that Flickr image search, anytime you see tools that will do that attribution for you, definitely take advantage of that stuff. If you want to use a Flickr-based image on your PowerPoint slide, standard practice is just to put the URL at the very least at the bottom of the slide, or have a slide at the end where you list the images. The URL is the base minimum. You'd be better off if you put the name of the author as well. If you do an audio file, it seems perfectly standard practice at the end of your audio file to just at the end list. You can also just say, on our show page is your show notes. So you can have the audio file with the regular stuff. You just point people to a web page, and on that web page you can provide the attribution if you have multiple interviews and sources and things like that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Anyway, I do provide a link to this one person. She actually did a Creative Commons study, and she actually gets quite in-depth. I personally think she goes a little overboard, but then again, maybe that's called for in these times. So there also are things like Open Attribute and WordPress that are designed. These are plugins that you can attach to your WordPress blog that'll make it easier for you to provide attribution for third-party works. So attribution's important, but do keep in mind that, linking. I actually was talking very briefly with Svetlana about this during the exercise. As far as I know, there's no restriction against you linking to a work that's on the web, or deep linking yet, exactly. There are some court cases pending, and there's also even issues that if you, for example, link to defamatory content, that you may be implicitly endorsing the content on that link. There's also been cases that are in the courts now about linking to sites that do copyright infringement themselves. So in other words, you don't actually illegally copy that song, but you link to a place where they can go and listen to it illegally. To what extent are you in on that? As of now, I'm not aware of any court cases that don't affirm the right to link, but I guess that's one of those ones you just got to keep your eyes on the news because it could change anytime. And in terms of the access copyright stuff, I won't go into too much detail, but there's actually some pretty good resources within the UBC library that allow you to link directly to the proxies so that if you're on campus, people will be able to get to the article quickly. If they are off campus, they'll need to use a virtual private network to link to these materials and log in with their campus-wide login to get the materials. So there's more information about that on the library site. I don't want to go into too much length, but just to point out it can be done, and the library's there to help you on that. Another part of reuse that's kind of interesting is syndication. So if something has this thing called an RSS feed, you can actually take their live content in many cases and have it appear dynamically on your site. So for example, these are my bookmarks that are coming in. When I add a bookmark to a site, it'll be added to this site automatically. So I'm just taking the RSS feed. So WordPress has a little thing where I can say, take this RSS feed when this content is updated, just keep giving me the fresh stuff. I do the same thing with my Flickr images. So for example, these are my last 5 images on Flickr. And when I add new photos to Flickr, those images will change. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, other than to show you how to do it if you want to do this. And maybe it could be something we might have to talk about after the session, because I don't think everyone's into it. So essentially, by the way, if you're not wondering what is an RSS feed, for example, the RSS feed from my blog, it's this little standard that gets attached to a lot of social media tools. So YouTube channels have them, Flickr feeds have them, blogs have them, wiki pages have them. And if I want to dynamically replicate that content, I just need to add the feed, say show the channel, I'll show them all, yes, show the descriptions. Maybe I'll just generate this whole thing right now. And I can actually take a look at how that would render. So this content, I can post this into, this is my blog, I can post this into any environment I wish, and it'll adopt the look and feel of the local site. And then if I want to be able, and then when I update my blog, this content will be updated as well. And so there's a lot of social media that has these feeds attached to them. Again, as far as I know, if it's Creative Commons licensed material, there's nothing stopping you from doing this. Because you essentially are just linking back to them. Embedding is another one that kind of allows you to get away with a little bit of stuff, I think. And as far as I know, I haven't seen people really crack down on it. So this video on YouTube, you've probably seen this on YouTube videos. So you have this video. It's a neat video. I like it. I could just link to the YouTube page. But if you look here under this share button, this is one of the things that made YouTube huge. Well, yes, I can link to it. I can also embed it. And there's just a few lines of code here that I can paste into my blog, into my web environment, wherever. I'm not copying this video. I am basically linking to it. I'm creating a little box on my web page where I'm dynamically linking to this video on my own page. But the video stays on YouTube's server, and this user maintains control over the content. So if this person is upset that people are embedding their videos, first of all, they can turn off embedding. So it's a feature they allow or not allow. Or they can remove the video entirely. So in other words, you're not, can you understand the distinction between posting that little bit of code and downloading the video to your server, re-uploading it to your server? And so anyway, almost all the major online video services, not iTunes U, by the way, allow you to do this. YouTube mostly does, Blip TV does, Vimeo does. And when you start looking for embed code, you start to see it all over the place. And I'm going to show it to you in another place in a minute. So yeah, that same video I have here on my wiki page. So yeah, I was just going to talk a little bit about formats and why they're important. This is another reason I don't like iTunes U so much. Let's take a look at this nice little service from Berkeley, where they post their webcasts. And they've got these nice, it's Creative Commons licensed, they're posting these great lectures on different issues. But if I click on these links, it takes me to a Flash player that I have to be online and on their site to access. Now, this is more about, if I'm talking to you, if you decide to post your own material. To me, when I talk about the amount of reusability, to me this is a problem. I can't listen to this on the bus home. I can't download it to my machine and say isolate a 6-minute segment that's probably most important to my students. I have to send them to this site and say, oh, and, you know, and listen to the 32-minute mark, and then it's going to get interesting for you. I can't do any of these things. This is considered an open educational resource site. You'll find it on one of those indexes, but in my opinion, this is an example of the formats that they chose and the approach they chose, I think really detracts from its usefulness. So this content might be really good, but I'm way less likely to listen to it, and I'm way less likely to reuse it, which I think is important as the use of it. So again, just comparing that to, say, what this professor does. He did this thing called A Done a Day. He's a John Donne scholar. He's a beautiful reader. And he just throws an MP3 of him reading a John Donne poem. He licenses it Creative Commons. I can download that poem. I can take out 2 lines of it out of context and just fade it in, fade it out, however I want. He provides the commentary behind it. It's playable in 3 different ways. So this is something, by the way, that WordPress does. So this is give you an example of what a podcast in WordPress does. This is linked. I can play it in browser. Whoops, he took his file down. Or download it to my own machine. I just think that that's a way more considerate set of, and it's an MP3 file, so pretty well any application that I want to use to edit that file or combine it with other files or take an excerpt of it, it's all available. And you're maximizing what people down can do with it. So just before I wrap up, I just wanted to point out, if you want to use platforms at UBC for sharing stuff yourself, we have a pretty great WordPress installation here at UBC. And if you have a campus-wide login, you already have an account. All you have to do is hit this button, and you'll be guided through the process of starting your own WordPress blog. There's also workshops on WordPress blog going all the time here, and drop-ins. And on the wiki, which is what I've been using to use this service, it works the same way. A Creative Commons or a CWL, you have your account created on the wiki already, which, by the way, is not stored on the wiki. It's authenticated elsewhere, so you're not giving any of your personal data if you have a campus-wide login to identify yourself here. I just want to show kind of some of the reuse things that are very important to us here. First of all, this is MediaWiki, which is the same software that's used to build MediaWiki. It's used for dozens of other sites. So if you want to take my code for this material, for example, you can actually, even without logging in, just grab my markup code immediately. And you're more than welcome to take whatever you want, or take parts of it, whatever. So let's say we got this page here, which is a primer on social web tools that gets used by some people here. Now this is content that was developed out of our unit, but we wanted to make it as reusable as possible. So I'm just going to skip ahead. We have a plugin for WordPress, which is enabled on the WordPress blog, that'll let you take any MediaWiki site and put it in there. So that same content I just showed you is here on the UBC e-learning site. And you'll notice instead of it being a long scrolling page, they actually break the segments into tab browsing. So you could do this with a Wikipedia article. If you're using UBC blogs, you just put the URL for the Wikipedia page, and it'll be generated in there. The thing to keep in mind, too, is when that wiki content is updated, it'll be updated here as well. That's the difference between copying and pasting the content and syndicating it. You're not copying a chunk of content. You are pointing to it. So when this wiki, if we update the social web tools thing to take out a tool that maybe has gone offline, or we want to add new material to it, update it, change links, this will always be the freshest, newest material. And you can also, so even here, I was showing you that embed code. That embed code exists on this wiki page, or for every section of it. So you can take my wiki and embed it anywhere you want. And that's not, and this one's messy. You probably won't want to do this one. But I showed you that one on social web tools. So there's nothing stopping you. Whoops, I clicked the wrong one. There's nothing stopping you from taking that same site and posting it inside WebCT or Blackboard when it comes along. You'll notice it adopts the look and feel of the local environment. The links are the same color, the text is the same color, because it's just sending the content there, which is then goes through the style sheet of the local environment. So again, kind of the idea is to maximize reuse for people. We also have this pretty amazing book publisher, which allows people to download content off the wiki as PDFs, and you can combine as many pages as you want. You'll notice it strips out all the wiki crud and actually turns hyperlinks into footnotes. And then at the end, it actually puts together dynamically lists of all the sources and contributors. So anyway, we've worked really hard to make this wiki a space that makes, if you author content in the wiki, that's as easy as possible for you to reuse your own content. And by the way, you're the one who's most likely to reuse your own content, you or people you work with. But it may be someone on the other side of the planet, too. And it's kind of, I think, an exciting way to work. By the way, the UBC library is using this content management approach. This is stuff that was originally on a wiki, but this is now their own content here. So for example, that content is now being, this is hosted all on a wiki here inside the library site. I've gone right to 3. I can hear people putting their stuff away. I didn't get a chance to go through all your questions, but I'll hang out here for a little while. If anyone has additional questions or stuff they want to deal with, that's fine. If you have a moment to do the online evaluation, I'm sure the organizers would be happy with it. Please do be honest, but do keep in mind that I'm hypersensitive to criticism and have been known to sit up nights crying because people don't like me. But in all honesty, please do be honest. And I thank you very much for your time. I hope it was worth your time, and hope to see you again. Thanks.